I'm Ryan Martinson. This is my father, Doug Martinson. We live here in Nome, Alaska. We're a fourth generation mining family. Dad, when did Grandpa come here?
1960. They were loggers, and they had gone into the store to buy chokers and dynamite, and this guy was there looking for someone to run his dredge, which they ended up acquiring after a while, and the bucket line dredging started in 1960.
So I think I remember something about him and Grandma coming up to check it out.
Yeah, they came up to check it out. They flown in there. It's remote, and they can't get there.
Probably really remote in those days,
Really
without even a
remote,
four-wheeler or a three-wheeler to
Yeah,
ride.
no ATVs. Everything was on a dozer with a sled, or if you had enough money, you could get it dropped in with an airplane.
Or an old
landed with
or an old army truck.
Yeah, and so it was
on that short little runway.
It was like a covered wagon excursion to get there, with endless amounts of holes and pit holes and things to get stuck in and have to get out of, and so it was a job to get there.
So they must have come back to Washington then and
Yeah,
just had a discussion and then decided to go for it.
and they had the gold fever and they went mining, and so
Now,
here we are.
Did Cleon come with them right away?
Yes. So
They lived here all year round?
They lived in Bellingham, Washington, and come up for the summer. And so they were loggers, but they put off the logging for a while and did the gold mining, and they did well.
So or the way I understood it back in those days, there were enough dredging operations around the region, dozens of them, that oftentimes the dredge owner wasn't the operator. The dredge owner would maybe live somewhere else, and he would lease the operation out to a company to operate it on their behalf.
Yeah, they would run it for whoever owned it, kind of like a grub stake, and then split the costs. Well, split the costs, split the profits if there was any. If there wasn't any profits, which often happened, then there was a big argument, and then it went from there.
Yeah. Now they started operating it as a lease, right? And then eventually.
Yeah. First year was a lease. Second year they picked it up for basically free, as long as they gave the former owner a royalty to keep him going. He was an old guy, so he was happy with that. He didn't have to come up and get stuck and spend the night in the tundra, fighting mosquitoes and watching for bear.
Just sit back in Oregon and wait for the gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then it seems to me, I remember them going back to logging through the rest of the 60s, and then the enthusiasm of the gold mining started back up in the early 70s.
Yeah. They had leased it out to these people called, the nickname in town was Whiskey Syndicate, which led everybody to believe that there wasn't much going on up there besides whiskey.
So they leased it from the first owner, and then they acquired it from the first owner, and then they got into the subleasing.
Yeah, because they had to do a logging contract, and they leased it out for a year, and that group got so thirsty that they left the dredge sitting in the river and didn't park it for the winter, and the ice came down in the spring and broke it to pieces. So we came up in the early 70s to try to put it back together on a small budget.
Now that would have been with Grandpa and some of his brothers and sisters and cousins and nephews and
all kinds of
free help
relatives that were donating to the cause of getting this dredge going. Turns out it was an impossible task. So the ground is still there. The dredge is in pieces, but it's good ground and still mineable, and look forward to that.
So after the attempt to refloat the dredge, which went on for a couple of seasons and probably lots of discouragement and lots of cash running through, I was still pretty young at that time, but I remember doing some open pit mining with dragline and dozers into a
Yeah.
sluice box.
Yep. Trying to get a little bit of money out of it to cover the cost of fuel and
Alternative
groceries.
mining methods to dredging.
Yeah, and there's a lot of alternative mining methods that work. Of course, being on a budget, we didn't have everything. We did the best we could with what we had, and got a little gold out of it, but yet not enough to cover the costs. So that just went on to where we had to get jobs in town and save up to go out and go mining again.
So that would have been early '80s. It seems like when we kind of stepped away from the active gold mining and got into the contracting.
Yeah, we got into gravel contracting, road building, runway, belly dump projects,
Pile driving, well drilling.
getting dropped off in a village for 2 seasons on a couple of landing craft, and there we were with opportunity to try to make some money with those projects.
The gold prices were favorable through the 70s and 80s, and once they got into the 90s, the gold prices were falling, and mining was becoming unprofitable. There was still the gold, but in order to be profitable in those days, I think you probably would have had to have had a plant that could process hundreds of yards an hour, or at least 100.
Yeah.
But the hot spots were few and far between, and the little guys, you'd have to find a hot spot all the time to survive. So it seems like mining kind of slowed way down until
Yeah, it was lean times for a while.
Until,
Even a lot of the neighbors had
late 90s, early
difficulty.
2000s maybe, when it started picking back up.
Yeah, and then it started rising again and made it to where if they did well and didn't waste their opportunities, they could make a little money at it.
Sometime in there, the Bema came through in the 80s.
Yeah.
I remember the Bema, remember hearing tale that it was the biggest bucket line dredge in the world used for mineral recovery. That there may have been some other bigger ones used for harbor navigation, but this was the biggest one for mining.
Yeah. It was used in Indonesia for tin mining under the water.
Okay.
And it came to the coast of Nome here, and they ran it for several years with a lot of drilling expense and everything, and found a lot of good hot spots out in the water, and did well, although everything has a cost, and the cost was high, and their income was high, but the cost was high too.
Right. Then
So-
they also had to, even though they were a big craft and well funded and well set up, they still had to fight the weather on the ocean.
They had to fight the ocean weather. The south wind would make it difficult to work with all the high surf, and so they would park it for the winter, and we would build an ice berm around it in the harbor and haul snow in and sink the snow down till it hit the seafloor, and build an ice berm around the whole dredge for the winter to keep it safe from the winter elements.
Now, wasn't that as opposed to towing it to an ice-free harbor every year, that was an insurance thing to keep it safe from the...
Yeah, insurance
ice?
had to have it safe, so they would insure it, of course. And it was a massive dredge that would have been a difficult job to haul it down to Dutch Harbor somewhere where there wasn't sea ice.
Yeah, annually.
And so that worked well. We would haul the snow in and make an ice berm, and then we would dig it out so they could get out mining early.
So that was just one of the many things that, in order to live here from generation to generation, not only being able to survive off of mining, which would have had its lean times and its maybe not so lean times, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say fat,
Yeah,
but we had to find other things to do
yeah.
to keep the income coming in.
Having construction, road building construction, and highway trucks and off-highway trucks and that sort of thing, we were able to pick up projects that helped pay the bills when the mining wasn't doing well.
And so all the while while we transitioned from mining into construction, we still had all these mining claims and properties to keep up on. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. The annual assessment work is something that has to be done, and we would be diligent in getting all of our assessment work done properly and turn in the proper paperwork to keep the privilege of keeping the ground.
which entitled pooling together some people and some resources and going out physically out to the claims and the properties and
Yes.
evaluating them and
Yeah,
then
and
documenting the paperwork accordingly. And
and keeping the work in line that showed that we did test holes and panning logs and all that stuff to.
And this is all in an effort to preserve the claims in the family name for when the gold pricing
Yes.
or the mining opportunity became favorable again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really worthwhile in keeping done right and in line and for that day when either the price of gold is up or that we are able to go out there and continue mining, which we have in some areas, to keep the mining going. And
Now, as far as the leases, talking about the claims, there's the ocean leases that the way I understand it, the BEMA would have probably had all of those leases, if not most of them.
yes,
And then when the BEMA left, for probably several reasons, those leases came up for grabs again in a time of low gold prices,
yes,
and there didn't seem to be a whole lot of enthusiasm for running out and snatching them, but a few different groups did acquire large blocks of them. And it kind of seems like, to me, that from my memory, the late 90s was about the time of the birth of the, if I can say that, the birth of the small to mid-sized suction dredge.
yeah, contraptions.
Contraptions on rafts.
All sorts of things being invented that maybe never got patented, but a lot of them would get scrapped and they'd sew out and try something different until they figured out what worked. And some dredges, smaller dredges, were on barrels welded together, and some were on pontoons that were leaking, and then there was fighting over who was on which ground, and there was almost a pirate kind of a mentality, like whoever got there first could keep away the other fellas, and they would keep mining, and they had a few fights and arguments out there too. Or whoever didn't sink first, when the surf came up, and then they'd all have to run back to the port and fight for a place to tie off to. So it was a pretty entertaining
Era.
bunch of guys there.
And this would have been in the day when they would have likely been making deals with Norm Stiles and those guys that own the big blocks,
Yeah.
and then paying a royalty to them.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, some of those big blocks were even actually drilled and tested by Shell Oil Company in the 60s. And then, of course, the BEMA, when they came in, they did a massive amount of drilling and testing. So, of course, then there were some owners of leases that, like you say, subleased out to the little guys, and they'd all go out there and dive, some with excavators. In more recent times in the winter, under the sea ice, which is filmed in some places, but a lot of those guys never, a lot of those fellows that mine never were filmed, but had just as many adventures and misadventures and close calls and
Yeah, no doubt.
and stories that would make a book read well.
So, early 2000s, gold prices come back up. Fuel prices are still not too ridiculous. And it seems like inland mining, land mining, would have had a rebirth of enthusiasm. Seems like to me, when I was little, I remember old cable blade dozers with pony motors and drag lines, and making parts and making do and digging through scrap piles to keep things going. And it seems like around the 90s, I don't know, maybe it has to do with low interest rates or something, but all of a sudden all this equipment starts showing up around here, and the average miner's got a nice excavator, and he's got a decent dozer and maybe a haul truck and some pumps, and it was kind of a rebirth of mining with an upscale of the equipment that was not available 10 or 15 years before that.
And a lot of nice equipment. Nice equipment was still 30 years old, but it was a lot nicer than the 60-year-old equipment that we were still using.
Wash plants became common.
Yeah.
Seems like the old timers without, and when I say old timers, I mean as early as the 70s and 80s, were still processing materials without a wash plant, meaning that they weren't segregating the material well enough to get good recovery.
Yes, improvements there for sure.
When the wash plants came around, they were able to scalp off their larger rocks and only process, say, 1/2 inch or 3/4 sizing, which improved the recovery and decreased material handling.
Yeah, and the fact that they had a dozer then or now that had a real starter motor in it and not a pony motor.
Or a cable blade.
A cable blade. The pony motor, you'd crank on that thing till you're down to your t-shirt, hoping it would finally start, and then it would make a puff, and then you'd get all excited, and then crank another while, and finally it would go, and then you could get your motor started.
So these big diesel engines, they didn't have starters with enough cranking amps to turn a big diesel engine, so the Cat made a two-cylinder, right? Two-cylinder gas engine?
Yeah.
That fit into the hole where the starter would go. You had to get this pony motor, they call it, started up. And the new ones had an electric start on the pony motor, but the old ones had a
gosh.
So it was pretty much a sideshow if it didn't start right away. It was a bit frustrating, but it would finally go, and then you had an engine running, which was a really big deal. And
we were talking about modern equipment,
and
now we're back to talking about pony motors again.
It's all part of gold mining and how it transformed.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, my brother-in-law, my sister Sari's husband, he's from Idaho. He's been up here a few years, and he's been fortunate enough to, him and my sister are acquiring a gold mine that's, 13 miles out of town?
And we call it a gold ranch.
Gold ranch.
Because that's really what it is.
And this one actually came with a historic working bucket line dredge.
Really?
From back in the day. And it has an old diesel engine with a pony motor. So,
really?
So here's my brother-in-law, who's 20 years younger than me. I'm 20 years younger than my father. My father's about 20-something years younger than his father, and we're still using the same motor to
designed in the 40s.
Right.
The same pony motor engine to get started with.
It's just like a barrel. You know, you get tired of using barrels, but on the other hand, there's nothing like a barrel. So they're really nice, and they're also frustrating, but they're still a good barrel. Very useful. And so transporting out to the mine, even nowadays, it's still a job. Further out you go, the harder it is to get there. You got to make sure you take the trails, the proper trails and everything, and but it's not an easy drive. And back in the 70s, if we had to come to town, It was a day traveling on the trail before we got to the road, and then we would sleep in the ditch or somewhere where we could sleep in the truck or something, and then the next day drive into town. So it was a 2-day trip to town to get stuff, parts, fuel or whatever, and then 2 days back. So by the time we made a monthly trip to town to get things, we had spent a week round trip, and that took time. You know, freeze up is coming and things, tundra's starting to turn yellow, and we're always pushing for the last bit of work we could do. After spending 2 or 3 trips to town, it took a week. So it's that
Summer season's precious. Even here, we don't see summer till end of May, first part of June is when the snow's gone enough to start getting around. But you go 80 or 100 miles inland where we're talking about, it's a few weeks behind that even.
Yeah.
And on the fall end, it's a few weeks earlier.
Okay.
Up also. So
Sure.
typical inland here is like going to eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, where it's colder winters, hotter summers, much more sunshine,
Right.
much less coastal, and
course.
nicer weather in general.
You're right on the Bering Sea here, so that really weather changes rapidly.
And going back to the ocean mining, that's one of the drawbacks of the ocean mining is that unpredictable ocean weather. We built an 80 by 30 foot or 79 by 30 foot wide excavator barge. We built it from scratch and operated it for the last 7 years out there. And I found that there's a lot of gold out there, and it's not hard to find. What's hard to find is enough days to go out
And get the gold.
Yeah, the weather can turn. Everybody's out there digging for a day or two, or maybe a week if you're lucky, and but the weather can change, and the wave actions and the swells come up, and everybody heads in. You just can't take it. So then we'd all come to the harbor and watch the weather, the marine weather, hoping for a group of days we could go back out.
Harbor plugs up pretty quick when everybody runs in.
Oh, yeah.
Hide from the weather. We all have to raft up next to each other.
Yeah. I noticed that yesterday, the weather started, and all of a sudden they started coming in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really starts moving the ocean floor, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
And it'll muddy up so the divers can't see.
Right.
That'll go on for a week at a time, and with the excavator, we didn't have that issue of muddy water,
Right.
which is all legal and permitted and everything, but the surf itself would muddy the water way more than any miner did.
Yeah.
But then they couldn't dive.
Sure.
So the faster boats would get the best parking spot. Then everybody else had to tie up to other guys, and it was always a race to see who found the.
And everything is GPS out in the ocean.
So it's not a derby like it used to be. After the Bema left and the claims went into the handful of a few private people, those private people may have sat on them, or they may have subleased. And there wasn't a whole lot of oversight on who was where. This would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Sure.
2010, I believe the state of Alaska, somewhere in there, decided to dissolve the monopoly out there.
Right.
And they gave those 3 or 4 owners out there choice of their claims, that the leases that they wanted to keep, and the rest of them had to go back up on the auction block. The state figured there was too much wealth out there and too much opportunity for a few groups to have it that weren't willing or able or wanting to lease it or sell it or do something with it. So we were fortunate enough at that time to pick up, what was it, 13 originally?
Yeah, 13 leases at a lease auction, which really started the stampede going, the auction.
We call it the second gold rush, 2012.
Uh-huh.
So we were able to acquire some, and then we built a dredge and went out and started digging.
And at that point, now the ownership of these leases was, I don't remember how many are on the list, but there's many owners out there now.
Right.
Some operate on their own lease and some sublease, and there's a lot more activity out there now than there was prior to the dissolving of the monopoly.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the early bidders on the leases were even the big diamond companies in South Africa had them,
De Beers.
and then they sold off to others, and so they're still all out there. There's a lot of gold out there, but it's hard to get.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean,
There's
time-wise is the worst part. Everything out there is salty. Everything is getting rusty, and it's just a challenge.
Yeah.
It's worth it, but not without some frustration sometimes with dealing with the weather, with the high wave action, which parks everybody.
and then you got a crew. So
Right.
So when we're running, we have 2 crews, and it may be similar to these other operations. Some might have 2, some might have 3, but
Uh-huh.
we're able to operate with 2. So you go out there with 2 guys and you run the day shift, and then here comes the crew boat with 2 fresh guys on it, and they run the night shift, and you flip-flop back and forth.
Sure.
Which you're working a 12-hour shift out there, but there's a hour of travel on each end, so it's a 14-hour day.
Yeah.
So there's always challenges, just getting to there and back.
Sure.
Sometimes the water's nice and it's like a ski boat. Sometimes it's very rough, and even in the skiff that you're going in to and from in, you're a little bit concerned for your life,
Yeah.
in bobbing up and down through this stuff. And then one time we lost our steering on our skiff.
While we were out there.
The motor would run, but we couldn't steer, so we had to duct tape and strap a shovel to the top of the motor, and one guy ran the throttle and the other guy steered like but you got to do something.
You got to do something.
You got to get back.
7 miles up the beach.
That's
so
right.
We got to get home.
You can't just float.
No.
No.
And then a lot of times the wind's blowing. If the wind's blowing from the north, it's usually calmer. But if you break down with the wind blowing from the north, you start drifting out to sea.
That's not good.
So things like that were going on all the time. A lot of resourceful things, MacGyver kind of stuff, just to get in and out, or duct tape. Anything goes, trying to just get your job done.
Yeah.
And everybody has a good idea. Somebody might have a better idea than you, and so you just take it and get home with it. Or get water in the gas and the motor quits, and that's why you got the little extra motor on the side, just to get home.
Oh, okay. Just to.
Yeah.
So yeah, nowadays all the leases are all their corners are GPSed,
Uh-huh.
and most of the operators are responsible enough to stay on their own claims, or stay on the claim that they've been allowed to be on. Once in a while, we catch a pirate. Somebody might be over the line by. I'm just a little bit over the line. Well, you're either over the line or you're not.
Yeah, right.
So, those usually go over pretty well. The person's usually apologetic, or it was an accident, or something, but
Yeah.
they get out of there and move on. But, there's on the ocean, there's the beach,
Right.
which you can mine with a shovel and a pan and a homemade sluice box or a commercial one. Then you move a little further out into the surf, and there's those surf crawlers, which is a big excavator that travels out into the surf with another excavator on top of it that feeds a plant. And those guys can go from anywhere from 0 to about 5 feet of water.
Yeah. A large excavator car body with tracks, and then a little excavator on top. kind of for flotation, but so he could dig out there
Oh, yeah.
from shore.
So you got the beach deposit, and then you got the surf deposit, and then beyond the surf deposit is where the excavator dredges like to go. Even though they're on an excavator and you think they can dig really deep, they really can't. They need enough water to float.
Right.
3 or 4 or 5 feet of water for their draft. But the excavator is on the deck, so it has to be able to reach the bottom,
Right.
and you can only work in about 5 to 15 feet of water with the
Okay.
excavator. So even though we're on this big craft and we got this excavator on there, we're still only a couple hundred feet from shore. But
And then there's all that ground out there that's deeper, that's for the next size bigger excavator.
Yeah.
Or some other remotely operated undersea crawler suction screen outfit that they have.
And I think that's what you reminded me as I've had an opportunity to learn more about Nome, is that it's still an active gold mining area, where many areas like in the Klondike and many other areas have really gone, some of them have gone by the wayside or is just not, but Nome is continuing to transform to the next level.
There's just enough excitement to keep that going, and the drill records out offshore stop at some point because it's as far as they got, but there's gold beyond that to who knows how far.
Yeah.
So they've even mined out there remotely beyond the drill records, and there's gold there. So how far does it go? How much there is?
Right.
Is enough of a mystery to keep everybody excited, even though it costs them a lot.
Right, to get
do it.
there.
it's a good way to say that.
Yeah.
And then the ocean's just nasty enough that it's only going to give them a little taste.
That's right.
Moving back on the land, the ocean has its problems. The nice thing about the ocean is there's no overburden, no weight,
Right.
no worthless ground to move out of the way to get to the gold. It's
Right.
right there,
And fully permitted to do so.
fully permitted, and but you got that ocean.
Sure.
And then on land, then you're back to the problem of the overburden.
What do you do with the
And also, contrary to the ocean, the ocean has its spots that are richer than most, but you can almost always find gold anywhere on the ocean.
Yeah.
You can't just go out on the tundra and dig a hole and think there's going to be gold.
Right.
The gold on the inland's going to be on a stream bench, in a gully, down in a riverbed, on bedrock somewhere, any number of places, maybe in a big open pit. And then that's going to have the challenge of the overburden,
Sure.
what to do with the surface water that you encounter. There may be a trail that you have to preserve.
Also strictly regulated to all those things that need to be taken care of to make sure everything's not too muddy in some places.
Yeah.
Reclamation plans,
Uh-huh.
tailings storage responsibly, and settling ponds, and
A lot more regulation.
a lot more regulations,
Yeah.
and everybody can see it. So you're doing your best to keep it looking the way that you said that you would
Right.
make it.
And much more good weather, unless there's a good rainstorm. But the ocean and the onshore both have their list of good and bad as far as challenges, like Ryan's saying.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Then there's permafrost. don't encounter any permafrost out
No, down the ocean.
But here. Some of the best untouched deposits are 50 feet deep under 40 feet of ice.
Right.
So
So,
there's a big cost to go in and get those.
oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges out on the water, like we started out with, like everybody did with a regular size bucket on the excavator, and some of the seafloor is soft, but a lot of it is really hard pan. And the boat you're digging from is moving, and some you couldn't break through the hard pan, and you'd come up with two little rocks. You know, it was kind of embarrassing. So we went to a narrower bucket that had more ground pressure, and then we could break right through and
Ah,
get a full bucket nearly every time. But things are trial and error
sure.
that way.
You push down on the excavator bucket to penetrate the seabed,
Right.
and the seabed's hard enough that all you're doing is lifting the boat up. So, like he said, that narrower bucket was more down pressure, and we could penetrate that.
Bigger is not necessarily better.
Oh, not in that case.
And it's totally blind digging. You can't see a thing down there. You got to go kind of by feel.
I like
To a
to call
certain
it clam
extent.
digging.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a good explanation.
And then, of course, the boat's bobbing around, and I was the only one out there in our crew that got seasick.
Is that right?
So I was designated as a skiff guy, because the little skiff, like a ski boat, it wasn't that bad, but get it on the dredge and bobbing around and shaking and everything, and I'd be heading right for the side rail right away.
Well, it's just as well too, because if we're out there running around the clock with four guys, we're breaking things.
Yeah,
We're needing parts.
right.
There has to be somebody on the ground that's running around,
Running around.
managing
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So,
And handling the
so he's being humble. He
concentrates.
got sick, but his job was needed
Yeah.
on shore too. So,
So we would end up with, like everybody else would, you'd end up with buckets of concentrates from the sluice box or
Yeah.
other gold contraption that needed to be brought in and then brought into a little room somewhere and reprocessed further down
Sure.
to where you can get the gold out of
They
sand.
go out of it.
And
So
that had to be done too, so that's my job. Well, mostly. Sometimes I'd get behind on it.
the goal on the mining operation, of course, is on anyone is to cram as much rich material through the process
Right.
as you can in the shortest amount of time without sacrificing recovery and without beating your equipment up.
yeah,
And then at the end, you've run. I don't know. It depends on your operation as yardage goes, but you move all this yardage through the plant, and then, like you say, at the end of the day, you have a couple 5-gallon buckets that you're hoping
yeah, right.
it's all going to pay off, and it's in there.
That's it.
And
can't
you look
see
at it, it just looks like the same dirt that you're throwing
Yeah,
over the
right.
side. So
So it's really transformed. Just a circle of gold mining just keeps on expanding
the work.
and learning.
I don't think the work's got any less harder. The old timers certainly. Well, I'll take that back. The old timers had to work harder than us,
Yeah.
just because of the resources.
Right.
that were-
You have equipment and resources, and
clothing, all that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Before water pumps, before any kind of heavy equipment.
Sure.
They had a tough way to go.
But the
there.
gold hasn't given up its spot any.
no any easier.
And I also like to say that the gold doesn't care how much money you spend on getting
No.
it.
No, it's going to hang in there as long as it
It's in there
can.
for $100 in equipment and expenses.
Yeah.
He might do way better than the guy that's in for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It depends on how much you haul in and how much you spend.
Sure.
You spend $1 more than you hauled in, and you lost money.
Yeah.
And even the big mining companies all reduce their things down to buckets. And then
Yeah.
from there they go into the next room, and the buckets will show whether they got anything or not.
Any results?
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting because it really gives a background of land mining, sea mining, and everything that goes into it.
Yeah. We're not pros at it, but we've done it. We've
Yeah.
done both of them.
So, well, good.
I don't know that one's better or worse or easier or than the other, but land certainly seems to be a bit more forgiving than the ocean.
The land mining could easily fall into, and it does to us and others around here, as more of a lifestyle.
There you go.
Certainly more than the ocean.
Yeah.
The ocean isn't a good lifestyle, but
No.
it can be profitable.
Right.
But
It's more like a
But
job.
there's something
factory
about
job.
mining
Yeah,
the land
right.
that whether you had a good season or not, you've had a well, mostly had a great time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in your rain gear, walking around in mud, greasing something, or wishing you're in the cabin having a bowl of soup or something. But for the most part, the land mining can be enjoyable whether you make money or not.
Yeah.
That's partly because of the environment.
Sure.
You know, at the end of the day, your family can come and see you, or you can have a picnic outside
Right.
or something, or go down to the creek and skip rocks, or spend some time
Sure.
at the location.
At the location.
besides working.
Right.
And, on the ocean, you're at work,
You're at work.
and nobody wants to come and see you.
No.
One of our mining places, being very remote, is also really near by air to hot springs.
Ah.
So you can, at the end of the day or any time of the day, you can jump in the plane and fly up to the hot springs and have a soak or spend the night or something, and just kind of treat yourself to something that is hard to find in other places.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's a really good thing to do.
Well, good. This has been interesting. It's really really gives an insight about gold mining more than just here's the piece of gold and that's it. There's a lot that goes into it.
A lot of sacrifice. The family sacrifices
Right.
time.
Yeah.
There's the beautiful days where everybody wants to be out playing and enjoying the summer, and it's like, nope, we've got dirt to haul, or
Yeah,
this
right.
is broke down.
Sure.
Got to fix that. Or,
And in panning, oftentimes you see a pan with a bunch of gold in it, and that doesn't really happen. If you're testing and you got a good pan, when you're done, you might have, a couple dozen little flakes, depending on their size or something, and that would determine whether you thought it was a good
Yeah.
area or not. But it doesn't take much in a pan to look good. On the other hand, there's still all that other work to do, and you hope you didn't just get one pan that was good and the rest of it is nothing. So
Yeah.
there's always a risk.
that can get frustrating.
Yeah.
You go out and you see some colored dirt that looks really nice, which is the other nice thing about being on
Right.
land, is you can see the strata in your cut.
Right.
You can target an area.
Sure.
On the ocean, you're just
You're just going, putting in, digging in.
anyway, so you might see a really nice spot and you get all excited and you run over and pan it, and it's great. And now you got to go show somebody.
Right.
So you go show somebody and you bring them over
You
and
come back.
and you pan it and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What'd you bring me over here for?" And you're like, "It's here, I swear."
And then 5 or 6 more pans and there's still nothing. And then there it is again. So it's
And then you're like, "What do? Do we haul it away to the
Right.
scrap pile, or do we run it?" And then you're like, "Well, I guess we're gonna run it."
if you got gold fever, you run it, whether you make money or not.
Right.
Otherwise, you might determine that maybe you should look a little more, but you can't spend all summer looking.
Right.
You got to get some.
You got to get some
So
results.
it's always a balance of really doing a good job of seeing if it's there or not.
Yeah.
But sometimes your wish to mine, whether you make money or not, overtakes
Sure.
your reasonable senses.
Yeah. Well, good, fellas. This gives us an idea, and certainly it's interesting. I just looked at the watch. We've talked an hour.
Really,
You really?
20 minutes.
That's it.
You gotta get to the airport.
I guess it took an hour to get it, but we got to get you to the airport.
That's right.